transition towards renewables and a clean grid. My role particularly is as a business development manager. I'm leading the commercial expansion for new products and the new markets, including evaluating pilot projects, as well as looking at new markets and seeing how our products fit into it.
I'm Reshma. I'm currently at Imperial College in the Department of Materials, and in October last year I started out as a Royal Academy of Engineering research fellow, so very much starting to develop my own research group. I work mainly on green hydrogen production using renewable electricity and basically designing catalysts to produce either green hydrogen or green chemicals. So very much in the materials design aspect of these technologies.
Mustafa Ozbilgin from Brunel University, London, at the business school. My work is on equality, diversity, and inclusion in organizations. I'm particularly interested in how organizations become more egalitarian and inclusive, and barriers to inclusion, particularly, I mean, in this panel, I would like to emphasize male domination and its resistance in organizations.
I'm Yasmin. I actually studied here in IEEE, did my MN here, graduated in 2020. I very much thought I was going to be working in clean energy. Actually, that was my plan. But during 2020, during COVID, I suddenly found myself with this opportunity to join a startup in digital health. So I worked in a startup for 2 years, building applications to help people with speech therapy to make it more accessible for people with chronic stutters. And I recently started my own company, again in digital health, but focused on females and fertility preservation. So making fertility testing and preservation treatments like egg freezing more affordable and accessible.
Thank you. So I think we can start the talk with a bit of personal background, and then we can go into more fundamental ideas of what you think is going well in your organizations and what should be better. So to start, one of the questions is, have you faced any obstacles in your careers at any point? And if you have, how have you overcome them? Yeah, I think that's the most important aspect, is how you can actually face kind of obstacles and grow from it. I don't know if anyone has anything to share.
I think on my side, it's been interesting being a founder, because I've noticed that men and women act really differently. I think especially when it comes to like a leadership position. So I found that a lot of my friends who are founders who are male have raised more money more easily, are more demanding, I think, are ready to say that they've built something that doesn't yet exist. And I've actually found that with women, it's been such a different story. I think more honest. These are stereotypes, obviously, right? But I think one thing that I've really learned is that I think at the very beginning, I was very, very much like that. And I've actually been learning a lot from my male friends that I can push and I can be more confident in that regard to kind of get what you want as a founder. So I think it's interesting because I've also seen that in my previous job. Yeah, it's just something that I've personally experienced. Of course, is not always the case, but it's definitely been interesting to learn.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you think it gave you more credibility somehow to also be able to say, okay, I'm not making things up. I actually back myself and done the research.
I was really approaching it like being careful, like, oh, you want to invest in my company, like here's all the risks, you know, and this is the reality of the situation, like just because I feel like as an investor, that's what I would want to know. I want to know everything that you did, what you think is going to happen, where you think it's going to go wrong. But I think from watching others, it's been really interesting to just see that, yeah, it's just that demanding of I'm going to make this happen, or we're already on that track, even though that might not be true. So I don't want to say that it's lying, because it's not. You are going to get there, and that's your vision. But I think there's definitely been a different mentality that I've been viewing between men and women in this field.
Okay, thank you.
I can pick up on that since I'm certainly not a founder, but I work in the business field. So I think there's definitely by now research even accepts that men are often promoted and sponsored based on what they can contribute and what their potential is. And for women, you need to basically have all the experience. You need to demonstrate you have done it before, not just once, but again and again, to be able to get buy-in to even reach a certain position. And I think I've certainly, what you mentioned, that men are more demanding, more assertive, and they're also very comfortable at making things up. And
on certain obstacles.
What about in academia? Do you think it's similar or?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I think the biggest kind of, I guess most interesting part of my life was finding people. So there's a lot of voices coming at you, right? Every decision you make, there's people saying multiple different things. And I think it's finding the core group of people who you trust and who you know are kind of always going to back you. So I grew up in India, and as a woman, it was fine until like you do your A levels and then you go to university. It was fine until then everyone was really supportive, and then suddenly you say, oh, well, I want to go. Well, so I did my PhD in America, and at the point I was saying I want to go to America and do a PhD, and suddenly there were people saying, whoa, but you're a woman. What about family, and what about getting married? And you know, you've taken all of this a bit too far now, right? Like education and all was fine, but it's got to stop at a certain point, and other things need to kind of take over. But it was really helpful for me to know, to have like my parents who are obviously very supportive, and have a certain group of friends who you can trust that these are the people giving you the correct advice, or even have like mentors within academia or like your personal tutor or whatever the equivalent is. So to know who you can trust and who you can listen to when there are these really kind of controversial and multiple different voices, I think that's been kind of really helpful and influential for me, kind of making different decisions kind of as I went on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a very personal thing, I think, which works even not for women or in life in general. It's good to have a good set of people you can trust.
Yeah, and I think particularly, with what both of you said, as women, we have this like tiny murmur in our brain saying, well, maybe I can do a PhD. It's never completely like, yes, that's the career path, that's the 10-year plan. Like, I feel we're very hesitant to make all of those kind of milestones. There's always like a quiet voice saying, maybe I can do that. But to have people around you who support you and say, no, that's definitely how you do it, and this is how you go about it, I think is something that's really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. Is this something, because we're speaking of experiences here, but is that something that kind of resonates within?
Yes, I think it does, because we all have intersectional characters. I'm from Turkey coming to Britain, studying for a PhD here, and then deciding to stay as an academic. I had to overcome challenges of legitimacy. I remember applying for my first job. I had to apply to 40 places before I was invited for my first interview. And the challenge continues, because it's not only being migrant, but also being gay added to this complexity. As a migrant, we are often not considered in the mixture of ethnicity. You know, when we think about ethnic equality, often they imagine about local ethnicities, ethnic differences, and migrants and refugees are kept outside, and visa controls. I mean, there's a lot of symbolic violence in the British system of integration. But as a person, I never sought integration or inclusion, because I always thought, would I like to be included in this? No. I always like to be outsider within and keep myself to myself, and keep my distance, healthy distance, to the systems and structures that oppress a great many people. So I had to struggle, but I have to say I'm okay now. But throughout my career, I got really rubbish advice. People telling me, why are you doing gender equality? It's a very hippie subject. It will not sustain you an academic career, and it was wrong. And I continued doing diversity, equality work. I'm really committed to it. I think it's just finding your passion and not listening to the advice of others helped me survive.
Okay, yeah. So you've talked about kind of personal approaches to things, but do you have examples in your companies or universities or in the company that you're starting of things that worked really well and that made you feel more empowered, or kind of, yeah, made you feel no different to men? Any initiatives or any things that you are planning to do?
I think for me personally, what has really helped is that having allies, men, women, everyone across the company, you really need to make that effort to get to know people and also personally connect with them, because end of the day, everyone is trying to get the work done, but it is that human connection that makes you bond well with someone and also share information with them that can also enhance your career. So I think it's very important to recognize within your companies who the decision makers are, and even potentially who the second potential decision makers could be in a few years, and have a genuine connection with them, get to know them, spend time with them, hear their opinions on how they view the company, how they view the strategy, how they view the future should be or will be. And I would say, yeah, just having a strong network of allies, it's very important.
And is that something you think your company could encourage more, or is it something that has to be natural and it has to be kind of yourself putting yourself out there and making friends and making connections?
I think the company does take initiatives, for example, having company drinks, or for example, organizing company socials. So companies could go as far as providing the platform to encourage people to socialize with each other. But I think it is genuinely up to individuals to do that. I would say I personally do not like socializing, and often introverts are mistaken for being shy. And I'm an example where I am quite confident, but I'm quite reserved. So it's it's optional for me. I'm privileged in the sense that I can choose to socialize, and I recognize the advantage in that. So I do put myself out there, but it is not something I enjoy, I would say, but I recognize it is something beneficial. So to answer your question, I think companies can facilitate it, but this is something individuals can work on themselves.
Okay, yeah. Do you organize drinks with? I'm guessing your team is still small.
We're still really small. We're about 4, I would say 4.5, so I'm part-time. And I think because we're in the female fertility space, at the moment we are all females. So it's interesting because I've gone from studying in a cohort of mostly men, and then at my previous company, all men, I was the only girl, to now working just with women. So it's really different. And I'm the boss now. So so yeah, it's been quite a change. It's interesting to see the difference in communication. I think if the previous company was more tiptoeing, I think, around each other. I think in a startup, there's always crazy things that happen. So, and decisions that have to be made and people having very different opinions. And I felt like, again, this is just my personal experience, but it was harder to talk about things more openly. It was harder to just be like, oh, this is what I think. I'm not trying to offend you. Like, I'm just, and there's a bit of like, who gets the power over here, a bit of power dynamics. Whereas now, at least in my team, it's just so easy to just talk about things, and I think empathize a bit more with each other's opinions and reach a decision more collaboratively. I think that's definitely a benefit that us as women have. And I think the more women are at the top in leadership, the more that will be spread and spread across to everybody. I think it's definitely a positive thing to have at least half women up there in the chain.
Yeah. Is that something that's true in academia as well, or?
Yeah, no, I was about to say, especially I guess at Imperial College, even the college leadership or especially Department of Materials, it's very easy now. So our head of department is a woman, and it's rare, but it's also nice to see that representation at, I guess, positions of power where it matters to have a woman there. Then it kind of trickles down to people working within the department. So even having simple things like, if we are going to have a work seminar after 5 o'clock, we are going to provide for childcare, right? So there's a special bursary saying it's not even competitive. It is just there was a work seminar after 5, or there was an interesting talk, evening lecture, whatever that might be. So that there are provisions then for childcare, or having even things like that. I think really changes who can participate in a lot of different events and who can't. Who make it more empathetic to women who are specifically early career and would want to start a family and have those kind of open discussions. Obviously, men out there too, especially at Imperial, at least as far as I'm concerned, have been really great in helping me and facilitating all of these kind of otherwise tricky conversations. But I think especially having women being part of the decision making within the department and within college, I think is especially helpful to kind of make a more equal environment.
Is that childcare policy just Department of Materials, or is it college-wise?
I think so. I think it's just
That's great.
materials, but and just even having that email like every now and then, you know, to say this is available. You know, you don't need to stress about, oh, this is after 5 and this is out of hours. So, you know, having simple things like, you know, the Christmas meal can be lunch rather than like 10 p.m. on a Friday night, right? Which might help a bit with people who might not want to socialize otherwise, saying, you know, we can do like a coffee and cake rather than, you know, going to a pub, which few of us might not enjoy, right? I think that really changes the breadth of people that might participate in these kind of events.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Do you have like examples of what companies are doing that's working really well?
Yes, as I said, I would like to deal with the male domination aspect of organizational life. It continues in STEM subjects today, and what companies do to overcome that. I would like to use the concept of Fish Green Hulk. It's called manspreading, epistemological manspreading. That is what's happening in companies. There is it's a more insidious process. We buy into it. The straightened view, the orthodoxy, is to accept what we have as structures, as flexibilities or inflexibilities when we join. When we join a game, we are willing participants of the game. After staying in the game for a long time, we forget the detrimental consequences of the game to our lives. And this is what happens to women. This is what happens to legitimate others, which we can call heterodox others. They are participants, but they have to play a game which was set to allow for manspreading. So I think flexibility examples do work. We need to bring flexibility in different regards. I think our imagination of flexibility is at the moment very limited, but what works is to bring flexibility, spatial flexibility, how buildings are used. Creating safe space is very important for all atypical participants in organizations. And then temporal flexibility, we have some examples already, how women and men work temporally. For example, men's temporal commitment is higher, but women's temporal commitment is shorter, but their effectiveness is higher in organizations. So by allowing temporal commitment differences, we can create more equitable organizations. We are mainly focusing on these two aspects, but I think we need to also think about cultural flexibility. Those fundamental assumptions that give meaning to our work, what work is. I think women and men have different forms of attachment and meaning-giving processes to work. We can change that. And also the symbolic flexibility. What it means for a woman to be confident and what it means for a man to be confident, it's read differently. There is a gendered reading. Women are interpreted as aggressive or ambitious. Men are interpreted as committed when they are confident. So we need to, I think, change the symbolic meanings, symbolic order by which we treat women and men. I think this kind of epistemic manspreading needs to be tackled, but through flexibility we can, I think, do that. And companies are mainly focusing on those two things, space and time. I think we can broaden the scope to make it more effective.
And how do you think, for example, on your example of how confidence is perceived, how do you think we can change that? What are kind of policies that could be taken to try and change that too?
Yes, I think one of the things we can do is to better regulate how, for example, confidence is interpreted. This happens in processes of career assessment. You need to have very clear statements of how confidence will be interpreted and how gender bias can be tackled within the process, because we mainly focus on this as an interpersonal issue. And I can tell you what fails in terms of equality. Training fails. training without organizational change, institutional change fails. People know what they are doing, consciously or subconsciously. I think what we need to do is to make sure that organizational processes are gender-proofed, bias-proofed. And that is going to take time, going through the processes and checking how women and men are assessed in real case scenarios. And
Can I actually ask a question? What you said earlier with regards to temporal commitment, what does that mean? You said that men generally have higher temporal commitment?
Yes, it means, for example, in Britain, we have the longest hours working culture thanks to men. Men's tradition of staying at work in inordinate number of hours, and we have the lowest productivity at the same time in Europe. And you can add one and one why men are staying. We have done a study on long hours work as care dodging. Women don't have the luxury of care dodging. They stay at work. Their commitment is limited because of their other commitments of care, for example, at home. And some women can fit the picture of this long hours of work, face time. I think we need to tackle face time because it's not productive time. In my organization as well, they're asking me to go to work all the time. I said to my dean when I first joined 13 years ago, do you want me to go to work or do the work? Two different things. I can be very productive anywhere, or I can come to work and socialize all the time. Because in academic environment, it's very difficult to really concentrate. I don't know other engineering departments are very different, but it's considered a place for socialization. I'm very similar to you. I don't want to, I'm really committed to my work. So this is the difference between women and men that we observe. Their temporal commitment may be shorter time-wise, but they are productive, they are committed to work. So we need to look at performance outcomes rather than time spent on work.
Makes sense. Thanks for explaining. I guess I have a question for you, Yasmin. Well, you're a very young startup, so if the answer is, I don't know, fair enough, but is that something that you've thought about when you started hiring people? Is how flexible you will be about time, about space, about anything?
Yeah, so starting work in COVID times, it was working from home. And I reaped the rewards, spent some time in Portugal, Spain, but I was the most productive ever. Like I had such a great time and I did miss the socialization. So it's quite nice now in this job to have both and it to be a choice. So I think in any startup, it's important that you actually meet because a lot happens when you are face to face and a lot of brainstorming and cool ideas come out of it. But I'm the same. I need to focus. I need to be in a room and just be on my laptop to actually get things done. So it's really nice to have that balance. And I think you notice from people who join your team what empowers them the most. It's very individual, actually. And I think it's hard to implement this in bigger corporates, right? Because you're not going to look at every single, I mean, maybe they can, I don't know. But at least from my perspective, it's easy to see like, okay, I understand that this person doesn't necessarily benefit from being in all these meetings and they don't really enjoy it, right? So maybe they don't need to do that. And I think this applies a lot of the time to engineers or developers because you want to focus and you want to get things done and it's a bit of a panic when you're in meetings all the time. So I think understanding the different roles in the company can really tie into what their flexibility should look like. And it's really different for everyone. Some people hate working from home. It's like their worst nightmare.
I hate working from home.
Yeah.
The socializing is really important in my opinion. Yeah.
But I think one of the big things comes back to the 10-year plan that you mentioned. I think most women, we start working and we have this pressure, right? We're like, wow, okay, so what am I going to achieve before I start having kids? Because even if I'm going to keep working when I'm having kids, there's still going to be a lot of time that I'm going to be unable to work or not wanting to, or maybe things, you just never know what's going to happen, right? And I think before this remote working, it was really, really stressful. And now, I mean, myself, I kind of think, okay, well, now I know that I can work from home and my partner can work from home or we can take turns and have that flexibility. And I think that's one of the best things that came out of COVID, basically, like that whole change in the corporate world as well. It's given so much flexibility and less stress when it comes to how you're going to manage the caretaking.
Yeah, I have a question about care. It's more about maternity leave. I've always wondered. So as far as I understand, at Imperial, at least you can kind of split between yourself and your partner how many weeks you can take. And I've always wondered if that's actually a good or a bad thing. Because on paper, to me, it looks great because you can split between men and women equally if you want to. But I feel like actually in the end, it might end up being 10 months to the woman and 2 days to the man. Because there's a corporate pressure for men to take less and women take more. There's less pressure on them to actually skip it. I wonder if that's something that every company does, or if it's something that actually happens.
I think we're probably in the phase where companies or institutions are changing rules a bit faster than society is willing to accept them. But I think it's at least a positive that change is happening, and I think that will trickle down with kind of the mindset of people changing, especially with it becoming more normal for men to also take time off and it not being viewed as this is something odd if a man were to say, I want 2 months off to take care of a child. And then I think it goes back into what you were saying with this kind of evasion of care, which is men usually kind of get into, right? And thinking of, yeah, I guess changing people's mindsets and think really getting into the idea of this as a common shared responsibility, right? Not more for a woman or a man.
Yeah, it's something you do two people. You can't.
Yeah, but still also bearing in mind that it's obviously the woman's body that kind of undergoes the change. So there's obviously that aspect to it too. So we can't literally, half it and say it's not completely 50-50, but at least the childcare responsibility, I think, can be shared a lot more than what people typically think about today.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, and so is there anything that you would like to see more of? So I don't know what the policies in your company are. Imperial have some ideas, no idea about Brunel or your startup. So are there things that you really wish to see in your company on policies for equality and they're just not happening?
I think it's an interesting one because to just know what discrimination is. So obviously we all have our experiences of how we are, right? We can't say that, oh, if I was a man, if I was like a different race, how would I be perceived then? How would people react to me? How would my life be in that case? So it's also in some cases very different to point out discrimination, whether it's something pertaining to you as an individual and it would happen to you regardless of how you look or what your gender is, or is it happening specifically because it is very focused on your gender or some part of your identity? I think in terms of what companies can do, I think definitely what you said about creating a safe space, I think it is very, very important. So if people do feel, and even if they're not sure that whether something was an act of discrimination, they can raise it in a safe way without thinking that this will backfire on my career or perhaps I will look difficult, because these are worries sometimes. I believe people belonging to minority groups have more than people who would be potentially, let's say, male or white or from stronger nationalities, because they are not operating with that fear that if this happens, then the repercussions will be much higher because the stakes are lower for them than for people who are from immigrant backgrounds or people of color, or basically being a woman or any other groups that are potentially being discriminated against.
Well, I have a lot of people that come to our platform and, maybe they've needed a lot of time to get like a diagnosis for something, or they're looking to start a certain treatment. And a lot of the time there's so much stress associated with that because they're thinking of what's going to happen at work. So I've had so many people tell me, I really want to do this, but I don't even know how to talk to I need to talk to work. I don't know what I'm going to do. How are they going to let me? Because, if you do something like egg freezing, for example, you need to go into a clinic every 2 days for scans during the process. So how are you going to get out of work? I'm going to have to take a week off work, to do this. So I think, again, just having that empathy and understanding for that individual person, what are they going through? there's some things that they need that time for, and just like no questions asked, right? I think more and more companies are doing this. I am seeing it, especially more to do with when couples are facing infertility and IVF, that they can get those benefits. A lot of companies also cover the costs for rounds of IVF and things like that. But I think that there's still so much, problems about, even if you have a heavy period and the worst thing is to go into work that day. I mean, I'm not going to get anything done if I'm in pain all day and feeling bloated and feeling really tired. Whereas that day at home where I can be super lazy and maybe I have a couple of hours of productivity and that's it. So again, just being a bit more empathetic and understanding that, especially in our 20s and 30s when we're going through potential family planning or diagnosis, just to have a bit more time and let that slide. I think that's a massive benefit that's increasing across companies now.
Yeah, so there's a positive trend of actual change.
There is definitely.
And okay, so one of the things that I've thought a lot about at Imperial specifically is how you can communicate diversity in STEM. Because the fact is, we're not very diverse. If you take Imperial, if you take IEEE, it's not diverse at all. And there's a lot of tools like positive discrimination or just having events like this where you invite people to share their experiences. And I don't know if any of them work. Oh, I hope it does. But I don't know how I feel about some of them. I'm not a big fan of positive discrimination. And yeah, I just wanted to hear your opinion, see if there's something you've seen that you thought was really effective or is really effective. And yeah, just if you have thoughts on that.
Shall I give a quick example from Ford Europe? They were losing all their female engineers upon the birth of their first child, and cost of losing a female engineer, senior engineer, to Ford was 250,000. And they successfully did some data collection. I think we need to be evidence-based in terms of providing equality. After the interviews, they realized that they left because they couldn't afford childcare. And the cost of childcare for the period of until the school was 50,000. And you can imagine 250,000 versus 50,000 pounds. You need to fund equality if you want to really be supportive. And also, you need to also broaden your imagination of safety nets. For example, we always think of women and parental care. I think the most vulnerable group in Britain are the single fathers, because they are not supported. If they are the single main carers, they are not supported by institutional policies. And now the policies are barely sharing responsibility. Women are still expected to do that. So we need to think about collecting better evidence, and surveys of opinion in terms of job satisfaction, commitment can reveal groups that are not so pleased with working for us, and also exit interviews, why people leave. Because some organizations are hugely diverse. Of course, Imperial is diverse, but why women cannot get to the top? If you look at the talent potential, talent pool, what we consider as atypical leaders who are very rarely represented in Imperial's management group or elite, they are actually very atypical at the moment. White, upper class men from who are able-bodied, heterosexual. They are like photocopies of one another. They only make less than 15% of the talent pool. So we can't continue with this, because democratization of education changed the whole landscape of talent. So they need to find ways of opening up opportunities. And I'm a great advocate of allowing for opposition and difference and atypicality in our approaches. For example, our definitions of talent still privilege the traditional group. We don't see talent in others because they are considered risky investment. And I can give you many examples, but women are considered risky investment, migrants are considered risky investment as in terms of their talent potential. So I think we need to address the trust deficit that we have about women's involvement in STEM leadership.
But what about if you have, I'll play devil's advocate, if you have a small company and you're trying to hire someone, and yeah, you have to hire, you have a choice between a white man who has a visa, you don't have to pay for anything, and a woman who's 3 months pregnant and you need to sponsor her for a visa. How do you make that decision? How can you force companies to say, go for the woman if she, skills equals and everything? Take the risk of paying more and they'll pay off. How can you enforce that?
Well, I think we should firstly not bail out those companies who are dumb enough to only employ men and then constantly fail, because there's a crisis of leadership at the moment. Actually, World Economic Forum shows that 70% of our global corporate leaders are incompetent. Only 30% are competent. There are two routes to leadership. One is the ignorant route that comes through privilege. Because of your male privilege or because of your class privilege, you can still be a leader in this country and in many other places. We need to block that route because we are here in universities and it's hugely diverse. And if we continue in this way, we will feed this ignorant route into leadership. We need to have more scientific route into leadership. This is not happening at the moment, I have to say. Still, there are glass lifts. Forget about glass ceilings. There are glass lifts taking ignorant, incompetent white men to the top. And the only way is to the top for them. And there is no way down. We need to start imagining leadership as a pathways in multiple ways. Once they are proving, for example, if a woman fails, with her whole female gender fails. But when a man fail all the time, but we never fail the male gender. We need to start doing that. If you want a concrete example, this man failed, we won't employ any man.
It's a very, very good example, actually, because I don't know if you're aware, but the Imperial president faced quite a lot of backlash in the last few years, and she resigned. And it was no, she didn't resign. I think she resigned-ish.
No, she did not resign.
Was she not forced
She
out?
came to the end of her term,
Oh, did she?
privately and fine.
Oh, I thought she was kind of forced out because of the bullying.
Maybe these are the rumors spreading.
Exactly.
But
Well,
another thing is, when a female vice chancellor steps down, the likelihood of getting another woman is almost zero. When a black candidate steps down, but male candidates step down, and the likelihood of getting another man is almost 90%. We need to stop it. We need to say this will stop with us. Our generation will stop this nonsense, because I think we are breeding incompetence in leadership, and we need to be more scientific and evidence-based in how we are allowing different forms of leadership emergence. And we are not doing that at the moment. We are still allowing old forms of unearned privileges to come to fore. We have to cut that out.
I guess with what you mentioned before too, we all know there's a massively leaky pipeline in STEM, right? And we've known that for a long time. I think how we address that is a whole different question, right? So we do a lot of outreach and go to schools and make sure girls are doing all the sciences, which is great. But often we don't recognize where that leak is actually happening, right? And often we're not doing well enough to retain the women, retain the diverse population that we have, right? So trying to exactly see where in this process are women dropping out, right? And if we don't fix that, it doesn't matter too much how many women we get into the system if we're not making better policies to retain these women, right? So for example, what are we going to judge when we do academic promotions, right? Is it just going to be publications, or are we going to talk more about, well, someone's had a career break for whatever reason, right? It might not just be childcare, it might be caring for aging parents, aging grandparents, which there's a lot of evidence out there that it's usually women who take on that responsibility too, right? So thinking about what we assess, is it just like a black and white, how many papers you have and how many committees you've been on? Are we looking at people as a whole and saying, you know, given the time and given all these constraints, this is what someone has achieved, right? So I think if we really want to address the problem, one part of it is definitely having conversations like this and trying to encourage, you know, younger women to get into STEM, but it's also, I think, like you said, blocking all of those, like trying to understand why women leave, right? Because there's a lot of really talented women, right, who don't end up staying in academia, and trying to understand why that might be the case, and then solving that, I think, is hugely important to me.
Yeah, although I have to say, if I take the EEE example, I completely agree with what you said, but there's 15 women to take from anyway. So even if you retain the same percentage, it's still, you know, it's still still one.
Yeah.
So I guess how do you push people to go for STEM subjects and stay in STEM subjects? Because a lot of people also just start doing engineering and then go into business because it's less. Business is probably not a good example, but go into less scientific subjects because it's less male dominated and you just take the easy way out. But how to, I feel like we also need to just increase the number of girls in STEM to start with.
We get involved. So
Yeah, be involved.
yeah, I mean, I'm hearing quite a lot, and I'm really very happy to hear this conversation. But I'm a little bit on Mustafa's side. I think that at the moment we are trying to fix ourselves. So we say, how will we fit the mold? How are we going to be more like the men who are successful? So we behave like them, we act like them, and then we just maintain the system. And the system obviously pushes us out, because the system has been built for that purpose, to actually maintain the status quo. And instead, I think that what we should be doing is to push the system to change with different criteria, like Mustafa was talking about, not the ignorant route, but the scientific credentials route. And this we are not doing enough of. And definitely, I would say at the college, definitely we are not doing it, because we have women in many positions of leadership, and I am in one, so I'm not excluding myself from this example, but we tend to be like the people who have exactly the same characteristics as the men who are successful, except we are also female. And basically, we are not even changing anything in the conversation, because behaving like them aggressively, we do not accept that behaving in a different way is productive. We just push out more women of the system. And I think this is what we need to change, the system, not try to change ourselves to fit the system. We are not brave enough just yet, and I'm not brave enough, I don't think. I'm pushing a little bit, but not enough.
No, that's really interesting. I think that's a point I've never thought of, or I've always been very confident, it's not the right word, but I've always ignored anyone telling me, oh, you're a woman, I don't care. But it's a personality trait, and if I was any different, I probably wouldn't be here now. So it's true that it's something that we are catering to strong personalities in a sense.
I would also like to pick up on the point of accessibility. I think STEM is generally seen as this scary thing that, you know, you need to be able to hold the numbers in your brain, you need to be excellent at mathematics, you need to have studied subjects like physics and so on. And people are different. They like studying different things. Even if they're good at it, they might not enjoy doing that. And I think it's very, very important that even in STEM fields, there are people from diverse backgrounds who have potentially studied either business or art, because the language needs to be accessible for everyone, especially it is a product that can improve the well-being. So for example, your startup, it has the potential to have a very positive impact on people. The industry that I work in, electricity is something that reaches the house of each and every single individual here. So it's not that it's a very technical field, but again, you need people who can make the language accessible and people actually understand what it is that you're talking about. So I think at the moment, a lot of STEM movements are focused on get more people to study mathematics or get more people to study STEM. But there also needs to be a focus on that if you have not studied STEM or you did not go to university in that subject, you can still work in those fields because you still need people from those diverse backgrounds to contribute.
I think almost for academic research, being creative is equally, if not more important than your technical ability, right? And often when we talk to especially younger generation, that at least an engineer is depicted as like a metal hammering person, right? With like a hard hat, which is I've never done that any day of my job, right? And I think having, especially with particularly younger girls and women who like the creative aspect, right? There's a huge scope and place for that, even within academic research, within organizations. I think there's there are jobs that are completely technical, but I think especially with research where the most kind of cutting edge research is happening, it's a lot of time it's driven by creativity, people coming up with creative ideas. So I think really changing the narrative about what an engineer is, what a scientist is, and not putting on that like, tall and strong man with like a hard hat and a spanner in a hand. Like that's not the picture that we want to depict when we talk about engineers. I think changing that is really important.
Okay, I guess my last question, and then we can please interrupt whenever you want. One of the, I think if you ask my niece, let's say, what an engineer is, she'll probably say me because she's seen me in her family. I come from a fairly privileged background. She knows. But if you ask someone, I'm not from the UK, so I have no idea where the poor regions are. But if you ask someone from a very lower social economic background what an engineer is, it's probably going to speak that vision. And I think my personal belief is that we should push for change in poorer backgrounds and try and get talent there, because that's where really the lift is broken. But I have no idea how you can do that. And I have a feeling like companies now are justifying themselves and saying, oh, we're doing great because we're catering to the women of the higher social backgrounds that weren't previously included, but we're still not caring about anyone that comes from a smaller uni in the middle of nowhere or didn't go to uni or something. So is there something in your company that's pushing for, social climbing or Imperial? I think there's some initiatives, but not that many in my opinion. Or is that something that the company shouldn't be responsible for and it's governments instead, maybe? I don't know.
I need to pick up on this word, responsibility. I think we are now living in an age where, because of the expansion of capitalist system, we are made responsible for the equality of others. Previously, this responsibility was held by the social state. State was responsible for providing a level playing field. And this responsibility is pushed down. And there's a lot of pressure on individual women to support other women. And it's adding to the pressure they are already experiencing. And this responsibilization, we need to look at the circles of responsibilization from the very macro level, how it is delegated all the way down. And we are forced to now fix women in this responsibilization circle, and it doesn't work. What needs to happen is to make organizations and sectors responsible. We can do that through laws. We can do that also industrial regulation. We need to make them responsible for the well-being of newcomers. Newcomers are coming from diverse backgrounds. There's a natural change. Larger cohorts of women, minority ethnic people, people of different sexual orientation, different age groups are coming into engineering, STEM subjects. But organizations remain the same. If we make them responsible to adapt to the conditions by which they can be effectively employed and also have eudaimonic well-being, they can have well-being that fits with their own lifestyles and choices, and then perform well. This requires a lot of change to the institution-making practices. Institutions need to change because we cannot change people. You cannot get a woman to be more like men. It's untenable. You cannot get a gay person to be more like a straight person. This happens at the moment. This is the central model at the moment. Even people with disabilities withdraw because they can't have accessibility. So we need to make organizations, I like this term, accessibility in general, not only for disability context. We need to make organizations more porous, more accepting, inclusive, but that requires them to change, not force us. Because, for example, if you look at all the atypical people, women are the most trained, and most talented in their organizations. Migrants are the same. Young people are under a lot of pressure to be trained, to fit the mold. And all that energy goes into trying to fit a really redundant mold. So I think in order to survive, be sustainable, it's an issue of sustainability, because these organizations cannot sustain themselves if they only select their talent from this 15% talent pool. Talent pool is much wider. Typical is very atypical right now. So we need to accept that we have a new normal. So I think getting organizations responsible is the way.
It's really interesting because I had such a different experience growing up as well. So I grew up in the Middle East, in the Emirates and in Lebanon a little bit. And I remember we had a yearbook every year, and it would show all of the graduates and where they study and what they do. And because it's an Arabic school, and this has its own problems, but it was very focused on STEM. So very heavy on mathematics, very little on arts. So you flick through the pages and everyone's like engineer, doctor. Like it was just very like, you know, because there are these expectations, I think, that come from Arabic parents. But it's interesting because I grew up with all of these women in my school, and I didn't have women in my personal life that were in STEM. And I just thought it was so normal. So I never doubted that I could do engineering. And then I moved to the UK to finish off my GCSEs and my A-levels. And I was the only one who did further maths. I think it was just me and one other girl who ended up doing engineering. And there was barely any promotion. It was like I was weird. You know, it's like, oh, you're doing it. That's so weird. So I came from this, and children are so impressionable, right? So my opinion formed in my childhood up until the age of when I was 14. It was, I'm going to probably do this. This is what I'm interested in. And I didn't view the engineer with the hard hat. And, you know, there was such a variety in my life to coming to the UK where that was super strange. And even, this is crazy, actually, now that I think about it. My school in the UK was split between girls and boys. It was kind of joint. It was a mixed thing. But the girls didn't have access to the computing A-level, but the guys did. And this was quite like a modern progressive school, but so I couldn't do computing. It was so, and now that I think about it, it's so strange coming from that background, which again is extreme because I guarantee you, so many people did engineering and they didn't want to do engineering. Okay, so I think there's that balance, but especially when you're a child and you see that normality around you, but you also see it in the media, right? Like I grew up watching Bob the Builder. It wasn't, you know, Samantha the Builder, right? So I think that's playing more into children's lives now, more equality that they're seeing. And I think that they're also going to just grow that confidence and be like, okay, I'm going to do it, even if you change and you go into work and you're a weirdo or you're the only girl or something like that. So I think there's definitely needs to be a larger push in the education system, at least from what I've seen in the UK. I think it's really lacking.
That's very correct. Yeah. It's the same in Belgium. So it's like very, very gender oriented. Okay, I don't necessarily have any more questions for you. If you have questions to ask yourselves, please do. And otherwise, we'll take questions from the audience.
I do have a question actually from you. I think you mentioned that you've obviously founded your own business, and I think research also supports that women founders that find it harder to raise money compared to their male counterparts. Is there anything that you've thought about that could potentially help with that, or do you think there are structural barriers that can only be changed through policy?
Yeah, so I think it's something like less than 1% of funding in startup world goes to female founders. Like I don't know if that's a full female founders or even, you know, half. So that was really shocking learning that, because I went into it not understanding, I'm not knowing about that bias that occurs. And it's really hard for me to say whether I've struggled more because I don't really have anything to compare to be honest. It's interesting because I think now there are more and more mentors. Now, like VC funds are trying to push to raise more, to give capital to female founders. So I don't think it's a regulatory thing. I think it actually is a bit of a marketing thing. And it's interesting because now when I look at VCs myself, if I see that their portfolio is just men, it's like, I don't want them to invest in me. I'd rather go for a VC that's more diversified and they seem like they're having more of an impact. And I think more and more people are thinking like that. And VCs are getting penalized for it, right? So I think it's definitely, if there was a regulatory aspect to it, it would just automatically jump and be a lot more equal in that regard. But I think it's slowly moving now. And it's probably from a premise of how good you look as an investor sometimes. But it's really interesting because I've also met just so many people who are really pushing for it. So many ex-female founders or female angel investors and male angel investors who are really rooting for it. And, you know, they give themselves that cutoff, like I'm going to invest 50-50 in women. Like I'm going to find women who are doing this and give them a chance. So there's opportunities, but again, if you look at the statistics, it's still super low. And it's hard. It's always hard to fundraise. I mean, I don't know. I've definitely met people who have raised very quickly again on bullshit, like complete bullshit, but it's always going to happen, I think. So.
But that'll be a bad investment in the end. So
Yeah, you got to take the risk, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
yes.
Do you think that do the pipelines exist in places like Brunel and Imperial for the conversations that you're having now to actually a funnel that exists where you can actually present these ideas to people that actually have stake?
Yes, I think there are a lot of structures at the moment in universities. Athena's one project, for example, one for pushing representation of women in academia. However, a lot of these projects put a lot of emphasis on individual women's change. They have mentoring schemes, for example. Mentoring schemes are wrong in this way. They are based on the assumption that atypical candidates like women will learn from a man's experience. I think men should learn from women's experiences to change the design of organizations. So reverse mentoring is what works at the moment. So we are pushing the agenda for that, changing practices of mentoring. And also a lot of senior women are pushed to do mentoring. Men's success, if you look at men's privileged class lived success, you see that they have never had mentoring. They had sponsorship. They were supported by other men. It's a very different pattern. So if you're emulating men as well, you have to emulate it, correctly and fund it and sponsor well.
Yeah, I think, there's a method. I think that there is a formal way to do this, but I'm not sure how much impact it actually has and if it's targeting the correct problems, right?
Or someone that actually has the ability. That's what I said, stakeholder, like someone that actually can make that change.
Yeah. So in college now we have a few days ago we had this CPI fund that was advertised. Did you see about that?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so I'll make sure that it reaches you. So there is we have a vice provost ETI, Stephen Curry, and we have, I don't know how big the fund is, but the maximum amount that you can request for a project is £10,000, and it focuses on a particular ETI topic. And I think that people don't know that there are these initiatives, first of all. And secondly, I think that everybody tries to do something at the supply level, and they are not trying to do anything at the structural level, at the organizational level. And those of us who are proposing those changes, we are not perceived so very positively because we are going to cause disruption in the system. Okay, so I am here like as an agent of disruption to try to instigate some activity amongst you, like get together with people like us in the Energy Futures Club or in your departments to actually define some nice problems that look at what would be the benefit of different organizational changes. Like Mustafa says, evidence, produce the evidence. And if we work together and you're prepared to put some time, because you need the workforce to deliver a project, if you're prepared to put some time, then something happens. Otherwise, we keep coming and going and having little wonderful discussions like this, but then we go back to our offices and you go back to your desks and everything is finished. Yeah, and then we start again next time round and other people do the same discussion and no progress. We have to make change, and to get change, we need structural change.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, and I really enjoyed some of the examples you gave for making the institutional changes that are required. But it takes a leader who is a disruptor, who's willing to make that change. That's number one. Or another way for that change to happen is to build pressure from below through conversations like these. So my question to the panel is, what would be the role of the everyday person in the organization, not someone in a leadership position? How can we change, speak, share ideas? What can we do to kind of bring, to accelerate this change in the structure in the organization?
Shall I give a theoretical answer?
Yes.
Cecilia Ridgway is a sociologist and a psychologist from Stanford University, and she has this idea of how institutions and structures change. It starts with conversations among people. Once these conversations are settled, there are emergent concerns. Then those can translate into shared concerns and then shape responsibility. We have a paper written around this notion of emergence of responsible leadership. It always emerges out of shared concerns. So we need to raise our shared concerns. This is a grassroots level. And the problem is, you are right, from the top as well, they are trying to retain their orthodoxy and established views. And then they try to pressure us with those. There are dual systems. And we need to, at the same time, resist the pressures to fit and comply with the old system. So we need to do two kinds of activism. On the one hand, we need to start imagining collectively what would happen, because equality has not happened. It might have happened in different places, in different forms. So we can move it around, but more importantly, start collectively imagining how it would look like, and then demand it from organizations. These demanding processes are very important. Demanding institutional changes. And then the second process is resisting the pressure. For example, every year they're asking me to sit on an equality training. I'm a professor in equality. Every year, because it's sheep dipping. Organizations send you need to sit in. And my students prepared this nasty slides. I have to sit and click. Yeah. Oh, you got 95%. Oh, I got it wrong. I'm sorry. So this is it. I mean, structures are not interested. They are throwing money at the problem, and they are fixing wrong things. So we need to change those, resist these systems. I always raise in my university what we are doing to promote equality is very superficial, but I commit time to make it more evidence-based. So we need to make our equality diversity efforts more evidence-based in our own institutions. This is the way to go.
I would also add, I definitely agree that change does need to come from people in leadership positions or people looking to grow in those roles. But oftentimes, like you said, the system itself is orthodox, and some people, they do not have malicious intention. It's just that it does not come to their mind. They're simply not aware of it. And at least some people are willing to work on it. So first you need to identify, is this person, for example, is it a sexist person, or is it someone just used to that old system? And if it's the latter, approach them and have a conversation with them. I think you can definitely have a conversation in a way that's not offensive. Try to understand the reasons and voice your opinion in a way that's also taking into account the fact that this person has lived in a world which is different from yours, used to it, and has simply not heard a different opinion. So you can just have a conversation with them, and also you can make it more social. Just ask them for coffee, talk about other things as well. So it's not just focused on that one particular aspect if it's something that makes you uncomfortable.
Focus on the outcome, because having the conversation is the first step. But then after you want a positive outcome as a result of the conversation, and this is something that needs to be documented and pushed. So the people need to be aware that if you actually prove to them with evidence that they should not be doing something, and they have this evidence, they cannot make a decision against that. Because they still go away as soon as the door closes, decide something else in a different room amongst themselves.
Yeah, you need to implement a monitoring mechanism.
I think there's a lot also with like public engagement. So celebrating examples of diverse people we have. So saying, well, we have a woman here doing a woman startup, Imperial alumni, right? So celebrate this, put this on like websites, like in email Imperial engagement team, right? And say, here's an example of someone doing great stuff who's been at Imperial, right? So this is where our alumni end up. And I feel like there's certain groups of people who are more proactive at doing this and end up being the people who are the face of all the success stories. So trying to diversify that. And I think we can already start to do that by, celebrating people in our community.
Sir, on that point, I don't have an opinion on this. I'd love to hear yours. Celebrating people's success. How do you feel, especially the women in the room, how do you feel when it's very obviously pointed out that it's a woman's success? Because I've spoken to some women who feel negatively about that. What are your thoughts?
I would hate, like, this is, I personally don't like it when that's the highlight of the story. But if people are kind of, subconsciously promoting other women or other people who are of different sexuality or things like that, then I think that's a proactive measure. But and you can feel it in the room. Like, I hate being the only woman with like 9 other men invited speakers at a conference. You know what box you're ticking, right? Like, I hate being like the only woman who's been invited to an interview, and you know exactly what the result is going to be, and this is just an exercise because they say, yeah, there was some diversity considered during this recruitment or this process, right?
If you can fit several boxes at once, it's perfect.
Yeah,
It's one person.
yeah. And I feel like because I'm also not white, then it's yes, ethnic diversity, gender. I tick several boxes, and then that's great, and you can just feel in the room when you're that box taking exercise, right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't like it when you obviously feel like this is like a push.
It is also not horrid when we see in college posters only pretty, like diverse women.
Yeah.
Like to just advertise something. I'm really offended.
Yeah.
And it happens regularly, very often, that we don't see people who do not look like the standard, or not just a male or female or black or brown or green or purple or pink. I don't know which one. Yeah, and at the moment we are just on the box ticking exercise just to fulfill our requirements. But I don't believe that there is real passion about it behind the people who are sitting in those positions. In the box.
We did a study on organizational accounting practices for gender equality, and we found that women achieve success despite their organizations, not thanks to them. And then organizations celebrate their achievements, although they were the main barrier on the way of women. So I think we need to stop organizations promoting achievements or advertising achievements when they have not invested in those. If it's a part of natural change and if it's only that women's effort, they should not be able to advocate that as if it's there as a result of their effort, because we asked in global organizations how much they invest on gender equality. They had invested nothing, but all of them were celebrating in their annual accounts. So these accounting practices are dangerous, and also a lot of equality departments have started shifting from HR to corporate branding. So this is happening globally. This is a very dangerous trend. So they will show images of women, other groups. It's very comfortable for them to divide groups by identity politics. If you are into identity politics, then it compromises also your professional stance. All professions should be open to everyone, and they should be looking at it as a problem-solving exercise rather than as kind of a celebration.
I can give you a real example. So the Earthshot Prize that went to Breathe, and we had it on the front of the college website. These people never mentioned that they were at Imperial College or that they were supported. Why? Probably because they have been here, they have benefited from the academic support of the given people. but they did not feel that the college supported them. But then immediately, 2 days later, we had it on the front of the college website, and it was feeling absolutely hideous. Watching the interview of the young people talking about their work and no mention of the college, and then we had it on the front page.
Yeah, but I think universities are difficult in that regard. A company, I can see why a company would be a barrier and not necessarily support innovation, but a university at some level is just to take on your CV, right? It's like you weren't there. I agree with you. I don't think it's fair for Imperial to take credit when it's not due, but it's the game, in my opinion. We go to Imperial because it's a good name on our CV, and then they get to claim whatever they want to say.
It has to be like on both sides. There has to be this understanding, and also there has to be some rapport in the process. So people's material cannot be somewhere if they have not agreed that this might be like this.
Yeah,
Okay, I think that at the moment this is not done legitimately enough about anything.
But do we know that they disagreed or agreed?
No, but you would have seen the interview that they had on the BBC,
Yeah.
which never mentioned, not a single word. But then we were discussing in the corridors, and then eventually we saw it on the front of the class. I mean, I think I've said no had they been asked, but
Yeah.
it did not come natural. Whereas I wear my Imperial College badge on my arm everywhere I go. I say that the Imperial College blood runs through my veins. Like you said, we come here because of the place, and the place has given us opportunities. But if people don't feel like that, then can't really doubt them.
Oh, that's true. It's a bit extreme.
What was the conclusion of that? Sorry, because I like of the do we is the solution because what you said makes a lot of sense. Like, is the inspiration behind it truthful? Like the reason that they're posting these pictures, and you're saying no, they're not right now.
I believe they're not. Yes.
So then, do we therefore just not do it?
No, I think
At this point.
no, I think we should be pushing more and more to penetrate in that. Like, of course, I'm also saying like trying to fit the mold. How do we fit the mold? We create a lot of messages, and we try to get our messages to penetrate, so that actually it's not just one or two women. Whenever it is it the last week we had all through the week we had the women's day. Yeah, it should be happening any time of the year, and it shouldn't be about women. It should be about excellence or discovery, or about something. And then we have a range of people, and we don't create these boxes. We just put women in a box, gay people in another box, brown people in another box, pink people in a different box.
I was going to say, I fully agree with that, because I did engineering Mecheng all of my undergraduate, and we had like the women in Mecheng talk. And for 4 years, we would like meet up for lunch and chat about the challenges as women that we face in Mecheng. And they were like, oh, what can we do? Like, what more can we do for these lunches? And I was like, do any of the guys hear anything that's been discussed in here? Because we keep on talking about what should change, and then it's never shared with anyone. And there's a complete lack of communication. And I also know, for example, we had some career events that we would organize. We were like, okay, let's make it more diverse and inclusive with more females on the panel. And so we would do that. And then like a lot of the male students didn't show up because they were like, oh, but that's a women's event. And you're like, no. It just so happens to have a lot of women on the panel, but it wasn't everyone event, and only women showed up. And I was like, well, clearly if they think there's that box, they're like, okay, it doesn't concern me, and they just have that separation. And it's just very complicated to then merge that, being like everyone is involved and should all work together for women, not just women for women.
Take over the events. They take over. I think this is what it is. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a revolutionary. a revolutionary, but in the positive sense. Like, you have to actually penetrate inside the system, and actually when people stop you, you have to say, oh, no. Okay, maybe you didn't win first time, you didn't win second time. You have to be persistent. Like, one by one, we drop down the barriers. There is no other way.
Allyship is also one method of building allies, which are not within your immediate identity category. Building male allies, the supporters at the leadership cohort can help galvanize. And also, there are certain rules now. For example, I don't join any panel if it doesn't have good distribution. We have a commitment across universities. And also, if this is the case, then I step down and offer alternatives for as panel members. So we can do a lot of disruptive interventions to change the scope of events. And I agree with you. When something is marked as margin, a women's event, it's considered marginal immediately. And that is risky investment in terms of the professional reputation of those women, particularly in universities. They are generally poorly attended, in our place as well. That's why I think the significance of intersectional solidarity is very important. Women's movement becomes stronger with other social movements which are progressive. I think we should see the possibilities of progress across not only human diversity. For example, there is the technological diversity, there is the biodiversity. These movements that push for those could see the possibilities of coexistence together and building on that success, because otherwise we will be in our silos and our efforts will be weak.
Yeah, exactly that. I don't know, I feel like if we try to normalize diversity rather than making it a checkbox or making it something that's like, oh, wow, look at us, we're diverse. It's like, no, you should be diverse. You shouldn't be so proud. Like, you can't be that proud about it because that should be the norm. And every time there's something that's like, oh, specific for women, or, oh, look at a woman who's been successful. And I'm like, okay, but you should share the numbers. There are a lot of successful women. Don't show that one and then be like, we are so proud we've managed to do this. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like, at least for me, it was either very discouraging because I was like, okay, I have to achieve really, really high to be recognized, or it was condescending because I was like, well, I just did like anyone else. Why am I being praised so hard just because of my gender? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, it is the idea that it should be normalized, I think, on a very early level. And then coming back to what you were saying with kids, I know at least for us in Kent, we tried to look at the diversity issue and saw there was like a 1-to-1 ratio between girls in A-levels physics and girls in engineering. And it is that if you show to younger kids being like, it's not that big of a deal, like you can do it. There's a lot of women out there, and it's kind of changing that representation of what it means to be in STEM or being an engineer, things like that. And I think hopefully that trickles up, if that makes sense. But it is kind of complicated, so obviously, to look at it.
Can I throw one other thing, because I'm getting older as well. And when I was like your age and here at the college, I have been at the college 30 years this year. So I have seen a lot of change. So when I was like you, I was also discussing about what are the opportunities that young women have, because I was anxious about how to get ahead myself. But now I see that quite a lot of people at my age group that are suffering like the menopause and the perimenopause, their lives are also affected. And they are the people who could be your allies, who might actually open doors. And different people are affected in different ways. And being a woman should not be a disability. Like at the moment we have in my department, in the toilets, we have sanitary pads that are being made available. And our new operations manager said, oh, we are spending so much money on this, we should not have them. And I was thinking, are you asking people to bring toilet paper? I mean, I'm sorry, there are so many things that we have to fight for. So, like just think that you're not by yourselves and then just trying to solve your problem as one person trying to break the system. But we just have to make this continuum of allyship across the system to actually change it, because the system is going to collapse if we don't change it. And this is like a much worse risk, isn't it, that the system collapses?
Okay, any more questions from the audience? I think the food is on its way. So just wanted to say thank you very much again for agreeing to come. This was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. And you might have to wait 2 minutes for the food, but please help yourself to some food afterwards. Thank you.
because Deliveroo is but Alina's just coming back with some snacks. There's some drinks out there. We can just mingle.
Our network's name is Ignite Plus. It's Ignite Plus. It's online at the moment.